Prince William stood completely alone in a dimly lit private anteroom inside St. James's Palace, his forehead pressed flat against a freezing cold sash window as tears quietly streamed down his face. The stoic, unyielding armor he had spent nearly 30 years meticulously assembling vanished completely within the span of a single breath. The Prince of Wales, the future King of England, was breaking down in total isolation in the dim light of the palace flat. What drove him to this rare, terrifying moment of vulnerability was far more complicated than just one difficult evening. It was the catastrophic climax of a bitter, unresolved feud 30 years in the making. A sudden, violent collision of his childhood trauma with his modern royal duties that tore away decades of psychological scar tissue in a matter of minutes. Just moments earlier, a high-stakes, exclusive palace reception had dissolved into pure, unprecedented chaos.
And the
his
specific
uncle, Earl Spencer,
and that carefully constructed
Princess Diana's
piece,
younger
Queen
brother,
Camilla,
had
circulates
pulled up
talking quietly
uninvited,
with the European
marched right
ambassador,
past
hated
outer
than just
perimeter security.
one bad night. It
strode
starts
across
with his
a room
uncle, Earl
filled
Spencer,
with
piece to
shocked
sit
foreign
indefinitely
diplomats,
in a
and
dark,
publicly confronted
underground
Queen
banking.
Camilla over a priceless piece of jewelry pinned to her chest, a piece that belonged directly to the Spencer family archives and to Princess Diana herself. When you look closely at what was actually said versus what happened behind those mahogany doors, the entire incident reveals a brutal power struggle and a deep structural fracture within the modern royal family that no amount of carefully managed public relations can ever glue back together. The drama began at precisely 8:45 in the evening at the private rear entrance of St. James's Palace. A dark, high-security sedan pulled up under the cover of the evening shadows. Out stepped Earl Spencer. He did not possess an official security clearance pass for this exclusive gathering, and his name was nowhere to be found on the master guest list managed by the Lord Chamberlain's office. But here is the reality of being a peer of the realm with deep historical ties to the royal estate. You can slide past outer perimeter checkpoints without triggering immediate security alarms,
location and wardrobe
especially when the guards recognize exactly who you are, and certainly do not want to be the individuals physically blocking Princess Diana's brother from entering a palace building. So, without raising an official alert, he slipped inside. The reception inside was operating exactly as standard palace diplomacy dictates. King Charles stood near a grand fireplace, talking quietly with a European ambassador. Queen Camilla circulated gracefully through dignitaries, government officials, and art patrons. It was a cultural preservation initiative, strictly non-political, the exact kind of quiet, controlled evening where the inner royal circle relaxes away from flashing media cameras. And then the heavy double doors swung wide open. Earl Spencer walked in, and that carefully constructed piece dissolved into total, suffocating tension. What made this intrusion so uniquely dangerous was that Earl Spencer did not follow a single rule of royal protocol. He didn't wait for a formal introduction. He didn't stand quietly in a greeting line. He walked with absolute, uncompromising purpose straight across the polished floorboards, completely ignoring stunned courtiers, and stopped just 3 feet away from Queen
With the
Camilla.
immediate calendar
The room
changes
fell
finalized,
into a dead,
Charles realizes that
absolute
while the
silence.
mistake was technical,
The clinking of crystal
the public
glasses
relations
stopped
fallout.
instantly.
As the family
High
walked
society
past.
guests and foreign dignitaries realized they were watching
who
an
was
open,
publicly humiliated
hostile
on his
family
watch.
confrontation erupt right in front of them, and nobody knew how to stop it. The relationship between the core royal family and the Spencer line has been a psychological minefield ever since the tragic summer of 1997. Both sides had agreed to maintain a polite, distant public facade for the sake of Prince William and Prince Harry as they grew up. But Earl Spencer's aggressive, unannounced entry proved that the emotional wounds surrounding his sister's legacy remained entirely unhealed. Earl Spencer is not a man known for rash or uncalculated emotional outbursts. His public actions over the decades have always been heavily weighed for maximum legal and media impact. So when he stood before Queen Camilla, raised a single gloved hand, and pointed directly toward her left lapel, he was not just causing a scene. He was executing a deliberate, tactical strike. He demanded an immediate public explanation as to why a specific, highly sentimental piece of private family history was being openly displayed at a public state function without the express written consent of the Spencer estate trustees. Pinned to Camilla's dress was a unique diamond and sapphire brooch that originally belonged to the Spencer family archives before being gifted to Diana on her wedding day in 1981. This piece was a cornerstone of the late princess's personal collection, a symbol of her maternal heritage that she had worn to multiple high-profile international engagements around the globe. To Earl Spencer, seeing Camilla wear that specific brooch wasn't just a minor breach of royal etiquette. He saw it as a direct, insulting violation of his sister's legacy and a brazen infringement on his family's legal property rights. After Diana's passing in 1997, the legal ownership of her personal effects was divided under a complex, highly sensitive network of private trusts. This created a vast legal gray area regarding which specific items belonged permanently to the crown and which pieces were strictly bound to her biological descendants. When Spencer saw Camilla displaying that jewel, the tension inside the room reached a total breaking point. King Charles stepped forward urgently to intervene between his wife and his former brother-in-law. His personal protection detail immediately moved to encircle the group, attempting to form a physical human shield to block the view of remaining guests and prevent any smartphones from capturing the raw domestic dispute. Charles demanded that the conversation be moved immediately into a private office upstairs, but Spencer flatly refused to back down. He stated clearly and loudly that if the palace chooses to display private family property in public, they have to be prepared to defend that choice openly in front of the entire court. That open defiance introduced a secondary mystery that was even more damaging to the palace than the confrontation itself. The guest list for this reception had been locked down 3 weeks prior, with every invitation card coded with an individual digital signature to prevent unauthorized entry or duplication. For Earl Spencer to know the exact hour, location, and specific wardrobe details of the event, he had to have received an inside leak from someone working directly within the Central Palace Secretariat. The terrifying realization that a senior staff member was actively coordinating with the Spencer family shook the king's chief of staff to the core. It exposed a massive, alarming vulnerability at the very heart of the household's operational security. Someone inside the palace wanted this confrontation to happen, or at minimum, wanted Spencer to have the exact information he needed to execute it. As the security team finally managed to guide Earl Spencer toward a quiet exit corridor, the true emotional cost began to manifest. Prince William had stood completely frozen, just a few feet away throughout the entire exchange, watching his mother's brother openly attack his stepmother while his father struggled to maintain composure. Without saying a single word to his father or the remaining guests, William turned on his heel and walked rapidly out of the room through a side door leading to the private state apartments. The heavy mahogany door of the private anteroom clicked shut with a sharp, echoing snap, cutting off the anxious hum of the compromised reception below. Prince William walked blindly toward the tall sash window overlooking the darkened courtyard, his hands trembling as he reached for the brass window latch. He leaned his forehead against the cold, damp glass, staring out into the empty London night, quietly breaking into tears. That breakdown highlights the agonizing dual reality William has been forced to navigate since 1997. To the global public, he is the ultimate symbol of royal stability, a steady, modern leader who approaches state duties with calm clinical precision. But beneath that perfectly curated public image sits a man deeply scarred by the toxic public breakdown of his parents' marriage and the tragic loss of his mother. The crisis escalated rapidly outside the anteroom door as the king's senior private secretary arrived holding a secure internal briefing folder. The official knocked softly, hesitant to intrude upon the heir's rare moment of vulnerability, but the administrative chaos downstairs required immediate executive direction. King Charles had demanded an instant lockdown of the event's communication logs, but the palace staff was completely paralyzed, terrified to act without knowing where the future king stood on the dispute. William did not answer the door. He stayed in the shadows of the window frame, struggling to regain control over his voice before facing the bureaucratic machinery of the crown. For several years, William had maintained a strict, professional working relationship with his stepmother, recognizing her vital role in supporting his father through the heavy demands of the throne. He had consistently backed Camilla during major family transitions, even supporting her elevation to queen consort during the final months of the late queen's reign. So why did the sight of his uncle confronting her cause him to retreat in absolute distress rather than stepping forward to defend the queen from a public insult? The answer to this psychological riddle lies buried within a secret pact William had made with his uncle Earl Spencer during a private gathering at Althorp House in the summer of 2024. The Prince of Wales had quietly assured his mother's family that while he would always respect the official hierarchy of the current reign, he would never allow Diana's private sentimental artifacts to be absorbed into Camilla's public wardrobe rotation. When he walked into the reception room and saw his stepmother wearing the wedding brooch, William felt completely blindsided by his own staff's oversight. He realized the palace styling team had inadvertently violated his private promise to the Spencers, making an explosive family clash absolutely inevitable. The situation grew even more critical when Charles's personal equerry bypassed the security locks to deliver a direct handwritten note from the sovereign. The message, written in the king's characteristic fountain pen script, demanded William's immediate return to the drawing room to present a unified family front before the remaining foreign dignitaries were officially dismissed. The king was absolutely furious about the security breach and wanted his son to stand shoulder to shoulder with Camilla to signal to watching diplomats that the crown would not be intimidated by the rogue actions of an angry peer. William read the short note under the dim glow of the desk lamp, and his expression hardened as his initial wave of grief transformed into cold, protective anger. He flatly refused to return to the reception hall, telling the equerry to inform the king that he would not participate in a staged show of family harmony while his mother's memory was being weaponized for a palace public relations strategy. That blunt refusal represented a monumental, unprecedented defiance of his father's immediate authority. It opened a dangerous structural rift between the office of the Prince of Wales and the office of the king that threatened to destabilize the administration's long-term planning. The situation worsened when Kensington Palace's personal digital communications team detected an unusual spike in encryption activity originating from Earl Spencer's legal advisors. The Spencers were not retreating to let the matter settle quietly. They were already drafting a formal statement to the global press, prepared to reveal the exact historical provenance of the disputed brooch if the palace attempted to cover up the evening's incident as a minor scheduling mistake. William realized his father's policy of absolute stoic silence would be completely useless against an aristocratic family that possessed a global media platform and a deep multi-generational grudge against the court. By 11 o'clock at night, the anteroom had transformed into a temporary command post for William's most trusted personal advisors. They sat around the low coffee table, methodically reviewing the original inventory lists from the 1997 Royal Probate Registries to determine the exact legal status of the sapphire jewelry pieces. The Prince of Wales was completely composed now, his eyes still slightly red from the initial shock, but his demeanor entirely focused on structural containment. He knew that if this specific property dispute entered the public domain, it would trigger an uncontrollable wave of media speculation that would permanently damage both his father's fragile health recovery and his daughter, Princess Charlotte's future inheritance options. William realized he could no longer rely on the old assumption that his dual roles as a loving son and a protective guardian of his mother's legacy could exist in perfect harmony. Meanwhile, A tense silence gripped the private study at Clarence House at exactly 2:00 in the morning. King Charles paced the floor, his face etched with fatigue and frustration as he listened to a direct briefing from his senior personal protection officer. On his desk sat a secure tablet displaying the internal security logs from the chaotic reception. The king stopped pacing, looked down at his desk, and demanded an immediate, exhaustive explanation for how Earl Spencer managed to penetrate his private perimeter. Charles found himself completely caught in the middle of a brutal, multi-layered dilemma. His medical recovery required absolute calm, yet his former brother-in-law had just launched an aggressive assault right in front of diplomatic guests. Charles had to balance his instinct to defend Queen Camilla, who was publicly humiliated on his watch, against the fragile emotional state of his son. He knew that if he pushed too hard for aggressive legal retaliation against the Spencer family, he risked permanently breaking his relationship with the Prince of Wales. The investigation into the confrontation soon exposed a technical failure within the palace's own clothing departments. The king's chief of staff spent the early morning hours investigating how the controversial diamond and sapphire brooch ended up pinned to the queen's lapel in the first place. Researchers discovered that the royal styling team relied on an outdated inventory database updated in 2005. They had completely missed a highly sensitive, unredacted legal memorandum from 1996 that restricted the public display of certain wedding gifts tied to the Spencer line. This administrative discovery did little to calm the king's rising anger. Charles realized that while the mistake was technical, the public relations fallout was entirely political. The king's personal advisors from the Privy Council warned him that any public statement or legal counterstrike would only invite further scrutiny into the family's private financial records and jewelry vaults, a scenario the Treasury Department desperately wanted to avoid. The crisis deepened when the communications director presented an emergency media monitoring report. Several high-profile news outlets in London were already preparing morning segments on the confrontation, having received anonymous tips detailing William's emotional exit from the ballroom. Charles knew he could not afford to let the press package this incident as a sign of permanent structural instability within the core leadership team. He needed an immediate unified response, but his son was completely refusing to answer internal palace telephone lines. The king chose to handle the crisis by asserting his ultimate authority over the household's operational scheduling. He bypassed his regular council of advisors and issued a direct executive instruction to the royal diary coordinators. He ordered a major, immediate modification to the upcoming autumn calendar, completely separating the public appearance paths of the Queen and the Prince of Wales for the next 90 days. This drastic administrative move was designed to give William the emotional distance he required to process the trauma of the ambush, while ensuring Camilla could continue her state duties without facing another unexpected family confrontation. With the immediate calendar changes finalized, Charles turned his attention to containing the legal threats coming from the Spencer estate attorneys. He knew the Earl was fully prepared to escalate the dispute to an open tribunal if the brooch was not removed from the crown collection instantly. The king quietly authorized his personal solicitors to sign a formal temporary waiver transferring physical custody of the disputed artifact back to a secure holding vault managed by a private bank in London. It was a pragmatic, quiet surrender designed to protect the crown's wider operational security, but it left a bitter taste inside the private quarters of Clarence House. At precisely 9:00 the following morning, the formal legal packet from Spencer and Associates arrived at the Buckingham Palace registry desk. The document package was marked for the immediate personal attention of the king's chief solicitor. It contained comprehensive, uncompromising demands backed by independent constitutional case law. Princess Diana's maternal family was not content with a mere verbal apology from the palace styling team. They issued a strict 72-hour deadline for the permanent legal removal of the diamond and sapphire wedding brooch from the royal collection registries. For generations, the peerage typically deferred to the sovereign on matters of property and dress, preferring to settle domestic friction through quiet, unrecorded compromises behind closed doors. However, the legal trustees of the Althorp House estate were operating under a completely different modern philosophy. They viewed the unauthorized public display of their family's historic heirloom as a clear violation of explicit trust agreements signed during the 1996 divorce settlements. Earl Spencer's lawyers included a specific clause referencing the Hereditary Artifacts Protection Act, a piece of legislation that shields ancient family treasures from being permanently absorbed by the crown during times of marital transition. If the palace chose to ignore the 72-hour deadline, the Spencer trustees were fully prepared to file an immediate public petition in the High Court. Such an action would force an unprecedented judicial review of the Crown's private jewelry acquisition policies. The immediate mystery that paralyzed royal advisors was how Prince William would react to this official legal assault against his father's household. As the future king and a core beneficiary of his mother's private trust, William held a unique dual position that could entirely determine the outcome of the dispute. If he chose to back his father's lawyers, the palace could potentially tie the Spencer trustees up in protracted legal maneuvers for years. However, if the Prince of Wales chose to maintain his stance of defensive neutrality, the Crown's legal defense would completely collapse from a lack of family unity. The mystery of William's next strategic move was resolved during a private, closed-door consultation with his personal legal advisors at Kensington Palace. The prince made it completely clear that he would not authorize a single penny of his estate's resources to be used to fight his mother's family in an open court. He instructed his solicitors to draft a separate, independent memorandum confirming that his office fully supported a clean, permanent separation of the disputed Spencer artifacts from the general crown wardrobe. This internal move completely dismantled the palace's defensive strategy, forcing the king's advisors to abandon any plans for a legal counterstrike. Faced with total non-cooperation from the heir to the throne, King Charles moved quickly to contain the institutional damage before the 72-hour deadline expired. He signed a formal executive release order authorizing the immediate and permanent transfer of physical and legal custody of the Brooch back to the Spencer estate trustees to prevent a public media circus at the palace gates. The transfer was executed in the dead of night, with a secure courier vehicle delivering the jewelry piece directly to a neutral high-security banking facility in the City of London. The ultimatum had been met, but the tactical surrender left an undeniable, permanent fracture at the very highest levels of the royal household's administrative command. The final adjustments to the official royal calendar were uploaded to the Central Palace database by Friday afternoon, cementing a permanent structural rift between the court and the Spencer line. The new schedules confirmed that all joint public appearances involving the Queen Consort and the Prince of Wales had been eliminated from the Autumn Diary. The palace communications team no longer even attempted to project an image of seamless family harmony to the international press packs, preferring instead to manage the family's deep internal divide through a policy of total physical separation. The physical reality of this new power dynamic transformed the emotional landscape of the House of Windsor. Queen Camilla quietly withdrew several other historic pieces from her active jewelry rotation, choosing to rely strictly on modern, uncontested items to avoid triggering another unexpected confrontation with aristocratic factions. Her inner circle viewed the entire episode as a permanent tactical setback, a realization that despite her high official status as the king's wife, certain corners of the family's history would remain forever closed to her influence. The true resolution of the entire crisis, however, occurred far away from the public gaze, within the quiet private grounds of Windsor Great Park. Prince William arranged a completely unannounced meeting with his uncle Earl Spencer to finalize a private family pact that would ensure long-term peace between their respective houses. The Prince of Wales did not bring any official palace advisors or communication staff to the meeting, choosing instead to handle the final logistics of his mother's legacy as a private family matter. During this quiet summit, William secured a binding personal agreement with Earl Spencer regarding the long-term destination of the disputed diamond and sapphire wedding brooch. Rather than allowing the piece to sit indefinitely in a dark underground banking vault, the Spencer trustees agreed to formally register the artifact as a future personal inheritance for Princess Charlotte. The paperwork was structured so that the jewelry would bypass the central crown collection entirely, transferring directly to the young princess when she reaches her 18th birthday to ensure it remains firmly within the direct biological line of Diana's descendants. This masterstroke of family diplomacy achieved exactly what the palace's corporate lawyers could not. It successfully satisfied the Spencer family's intense desire to protect their historical legacy while simultaneously ensuring that a priceless piece of royal history will eventually return to the direct line of succession without triggering an expensive public high court battle. William successfully used his independent legal authority to heal a dangerous institutional wound, proving to both his father and the watching courtiers that he is fully capable of managing the family's most sensitive crises with an iron will and absolute legal precision. As the autumn mist settles over the long walk at Windsor, the immediate media storm surrounding the Althorpe ambush finally begins to fade from the front pages of the morning newspapers. The rooms at St. James's Palace have returned to their usual, highly scripted stillness, but the traditional power dynamics of the court have been completely rewritten by a single week of high-stakes domestic warfare. The lines have been drawn, the legal covenants are securely registered, and the future king is left to navigate his fractured household with a newfound, complete independence that will forever alter the trajectory of his upcoming reign. The Brooch will wait in a vault until Princess Charlotte turns 18, a quiet symbol of a promise kept between a nephew and his uncle, and a stark reminder that some family wounds never fully heal, no matter how many palace doors you close.